Hi guys and welcome back. Today I am answering more questions from you guys that I started last week. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different art topics today. And I'm also working on this little watercolor painting. This is actually going to be for the postcard over on Patreon for the month of April. So the only way to get a print of this would be to sign up for the $10 tier or up before the end of April 2020. So if you'd like to get that sent to you in the mail, then make sure to go check that out and sign up. But anyways, let's just jump right in with some questions. And the question from Liz, how old are you now and how old were you when you started drawing? I am 29 years old and I started drawing when I was a kid at the very beginning, so I don't think there's necessarily an age. I just didn't stop drawing is what most people say. But she says that I'm 19 and I just started now and I know I'm a bit late and it's a long journey ahead. That is true. I'm a little anxious wanting to learn a little bit of everything but getting lost on the way. Any tips? That is actually a really great question, and one that I've struggled with a lot is just not knowing where to go, especially when you're first starting off and you don't really know where you're going to end up. One thing that I've done that has helped me gain a little bit more focus is I've sat down and I just thought about what's the type of artwork that I have loved doing and what's the type of artwork that I love looking at, and what are some of those things that are always there, things that I can probably always assume I'm going to want to create in my artwork. So for me, I always want to have a character in my piece. That's all I ever want to draw, and that's what I want to look at. So knowing that, I know that if I put time into learning anatomy and learning what the face looks like and how to shade it, which I still have a long way to go, but I know that if I put my efforts into that, it will always come back to benefiting the artwork that I am doing. So I think it's just important to take a minute to look at what are those things that you think will probably always be there in your work, always be a cornerstone to what you want to create. And Mystica asks, who are your favorite artists? Basically the same as earlier, the ones that I've found really influential. So Jock Hooper, Wiley Beckert, Muka, of course. I love Glenn Arthur's work. I absolutely love how he draws faces and the little details that he adds. I love Happy D Artist here on YouTube. She's one of my favorites too. And Leilani Joy, I adore the way that she works and the way she talks about her process. Yeah, those are some of my favorites. Why don't you post digital art anymore? What made you go traditional? I took a class at the very end of college for watercolor, which I actually wouldn't have taken if it wasn't a requirement. And I just completely fell in love with that process. I absolutely loved being able to just create something tangible and hold it at the end. And I love digital work. I absolutely adore it. And that was all that I had done up until that point. So I still have a really soft spot in my heart for it. But working in that class and then building on the things that I learned in that class afterwards, it made me realize a lot of things I really did want out of my work, and I loved working traditionally. And ultimately I just ended up devoting as much time as I could to working traditionally because I want to get as good as I can with what I'm working in. I do miss a lot of things about digital though, so there might be a time where I do come back and do a little bit of it, But anyways, what brushes do you use in Photoshop? So I actually do still do a lot of sketching in Photoshop, and my favorite all-time sketching brush for that is the Kyle Webster Animators sketch pencil one. And that one is a really great, it just has this perfect texture for it. It's very similar to a coal erase pencil traditionally. And Emily asks, what sort of things do you add to the piece to get the mood right before you even start on color comps? That is something that I've been really, really trying to put attention to the last little while. I've realized that there's a lot of pieces that I've done that are just not what I want to be creating more of. And it seems like it's going in the right path, but by the time I get to the end, it ends up being a miss. So the point is that I am trying to take a minute before I go into color comps after I'm done with the sketching, and I like to look at the sketch and think, okay, does this tell the story that I want? Are there details that could tell more of a story, even if that story is very cryptic? Are there details that are in one part of the piece but could easily tie into another part of the piece? So say if I have a certain detail, like a ribbon tied on one thing, and I have another element elsewhere that would make perfect sense for it to be over there as well, then I like to make sure that things like that are placed so that there is as much story and as much information and connection and continuity between everything in the piece so that it all flows together. I also like to take a minute to think about, well, what's actually happening in the piece. So say I want it to feel very fantastical, and maybe I want to use colors that are not originally tied to those things. So say I know that I want to use pinks and really warm colors when I get to the color comps, but maybe I want it to feel very fantastical, so I might make sure that it's in a nighttime setting so that I can use those pinks in the night sky, but it's something that isn't naturally occurring like that. So yeah, I like to take a second and really think through every step and try to make sure that things are as much there as possible. And Christina asks, could you do a brief overview of your Trekell brushes? Which ones are your favorites and why? I love Trekell. I've talked about this all the time, but they've sent me a pretty good amount of brushes, and I have bought a ton of brushes from them as well. So I basically use two different types from them. They're golden Taklon brushes, which are synthetic. They have a lot of spring to them. They keep their point really well. Those are really great for small details. That's for getting in these tiny little nooks and crannies. And I also use that type of brush for doing my line work in my watercolors now. I have a liner brush that's made of the golden Taklon material. That's the size 0 in their liner size. So that one's one that is just a staple for me. I have a ton of those in a ton of different sizes. I have a few flats. Mostly I have them in rounds. And I also have some Kolinsky brushes, and those are natural hair ones, so they're much more flexible. They hold a lot of water. They really help for doing a lot of larger washes. They are harder to get into little nooks and crannies because they don't hold that sharp point as well. So I like to use a combination of the two so that I can get a really smooth, quick wash over a lot of area, and then I'll go in with my golden Taklon brushes to really get into those little sharp areas so it can be as crisp and clean and sharp as possible. And I do actually have a link down in the description that will take you over to Trekell, and I get a little bit of a bounce back for when you do buy over there. But of course, I only recommend them because I love them. I absolutely love their brushes, so yeah, they're one of my favorite art tools. And Billy asks, as an aspiring art YouTuber, I was wondering if you have any recommendations on filming equipment, editing software, microphones, etc. Yeah, so with filming, I use a pretty expensive camera that I use to take pictures of large pieces, so you do not need a camera like what I have. There are a lot of options. In fact, a lot of phones now are perfectly suited for taking high enough quality videos for YouTube, especially since YouTube does downscale most video footage to a certain degree. So that's a great place to start if you just want to dive right in. The microphones are really the key thing that you want to invest in. So it actually is true where even as an artist on YouTube, where you think that the visuals are the most important part of the quality of the video, it's actually the sound. So as people watch your videos, they want the sound to be as high quality as possible. So the mic that I use is from the brand Blue, and it's called the Yeti Microphone. I adore it. I've had this thing since the very beginning of my YouTubing, and it's been solid. It's great, and it's not terribly expensive. So it's one that I highly recommend. That's the Blue Yeti. And editing software, I use Premiere Pro. I have since the very beginning, and I like it a lot. I've had a few hiccups that they've fixed, and whatever issues they had seems to have been resolved. But I also pay for all of the Adobe programs altogether, so I'm sure that there are some cheaper versions or free editing software out there as well, but I just personally have never used them, so I don't really have any recommendations for those. And Megan asks, would you ever consider selling your color comps as mini prints? I love that idea, actually. I love my color comps. They're just really fun to hold them all together and have. But yeah, I'd definitely be open to that kind of a thing. Sometimes I like to send them out for the top tiers over on Patreon, so that's not very common, but every once in a while that'll happen. I also like to keep the main one that I did, the one that I ended up doing the final of. If I sell the original, I like to have just that little color comp, that little bit of the original that I can hold on to. But I always collect them. I have a little bin in my closet that has all of my color comps collecting over there. And Sam says, I've been posting art on YouTube every week for a year now. I spend hours on my videos, but my husband, who posts unedited ramblings every few months, has more subscribers. What advice do I have for those who put in effort but don't get as much out of it? That is definitely something that I've felt the frustrations of. So I totally understand you. I get that. But the thing that has really just helped me a lot is just to think about how we're all running our own race, what someone else is creating, and especially when it's in just a completely different genre or a different type of video, it's fulfilling a different need for different people. And ultimately I can just do the best that I can with the type that I'm doing. And yeah, I don't know, it's hard to work through those more negative, jealous, frustrated emotions, but once I started putting that more into my head, I've been able to be a lot more at peace with the discrepancies between different types of videos and different channels, and yeah, all that sort of stuff. Maddie says, I'd love to know some of the meanings and stories behind your work. I would love to put that out more. I tend to hold that a little bit more close to the chest in the past, but I've wanted to make that more of a priority of talking about the things that I wanted to go into the piece, the stories and the actual intentions that I had behind it. So that will definitely be something that comes up more in the future when I'm creating my work, because I found that that's one of the big missing puzzle pieces for me for really creating work that makes me feel really whole and complete as an artist. Is I want them to have more of a story and more of a meaning, and talking about them and sharing that is going to help me to be able to make sure that that's in the piece more. And IPEC asks, do you consider making coloring pages? Sorry if I said your name terribly wrong, but I love your artwork. Thank you so much. I'd be delighted to color your drawings. I would love to do that. Actually, doing a coloring book is one of the things that's on my little short list of projects. So it is a consideration that I have been thinking about and I would love to do. I love doing line work, so it would be right up my alley of creating one. So hopefully not too long from now, there will be some coloring pages or a coloring book that I've released. And Charles asks about my favorite brushes and the ones that I use. And it's basically what I talked about earlier. Trekell's my all-time favorite brush brand that I've used. And I talked a bit about the two different types. But yeah, I like to have a liner round brush that's really small, and that's for my line work painting. I've been using more and more flat and filbert brushes for doing washes. I didn't use them like at all before, and now I really love them. They're fun to use for that. But yeah, basically my answer earlier is how I like to approach my brushes and which ones are my favorite. And Dreamy Illustration asks, how can you draw the hair without losing the overview? That is a really great question. It's really just breaking it down into a certain hierarchy. So how I draw it is I draw the face first, and then I know where the hairline is along the top of the forehead. And then I like to go into right where the part is and right on the hairlines, that little cross section there. And then I draw out the section where most of the hair is framing the face. So where most of the hair is flipping over on one side of the part. And then I follow that along and down to where it resolves itself at the bottom of the page. And I just make sure that the amount of hair in that section is consistent. And then I will do the other side of what's on the front of her face and closest to the viewer. And then I just work backwards from the top down. So as it recedes farther away from the viewer and then farther down. And then I just fill in the sections as I go. That way it has a priority of what's closest to the viewer. That stuff gets to have the most specific shape. I decide what flow I want it to have, where I want it to go, and that's what the viewer sees the most. And then as we go farther back, that's where it becomes overlapped, and then I can just build up where it needs it. And then after I get all of the larger basic shapes in, that's when I do all of the interior lines. And that's what makes it look much more complex than it actually is. But if you take out all of that interior line work, you'll see that it basically is just sectioned out. And as you go back, it has more and more sections. And Thalia asks, how did you decide what your subject matter was to make something on a frequent schedule? I love drawing, but the pressures of doing it and cranking out pieces frequently to grow my following makes me crumble and realize I don't have a subject I love to rehash and play around with, but you do with the dark fantasy theme. How do you find it, or did you just gravitate to it? That's a great question. It's something that actually I do struggle with a lot, and it's something that I've had to really put certain, not restrictions, but little guidelines, I guess, for myself to be able to work on it. So I find that there's a lot of themes and elements and designs that I have really enjoyed painting in the past or drawing and exploring, but I feel like I have to move past that into something new, into something different. And I'm trying to let myself embrace the things that I have enjoyed drawing and painting. So what did help me is I every once in a while I will sit down and write down a little list of just anything that I enjoyed painting, or anything that I actually just enjoy and I think is pretty or interesting, and I'll work from that. Even if there's always this little voice in my head that says, well, you just did something like that, or you drew a character like that 3 pieces ago or a month ago, you can't do that again. But really, I have to let myself do that. I have to give myself permission to do that. So I think that one thing that can help you maybe is to sit down and write a list. What are things that you think are really interesting? Types of flowers, types of animals, types of colors, types of subject matter, medium, anything. Write down that list and start working through that and finding if there's things that once you actually draw it, you don't really care for it. It wasn't really something that captured your interest, then you can cross it off. If there's something in a piece that you really loved exploring, then you can add it to the list or highlight it or make sure that you pay attention to it. But yeah, this is really definitely a challenge that I think a lot of us are struggling with. And I don't have a perfect answer because I'm still working through it myself, but those kind of things have helped me a little bit. And Chantel asks just basically what brushes do I use in Photoshop. So again, that Kyle Webster Animator's brush, and a lot of basic ones that are just right there on Photoshop, just round brushes that get the job done. I am not too picky with them now. I just use the things that'll just work. And Liz asks, how long does it take from sketch to final artwork? Ooh, that's a great question. I actually am not sure. I think that it usually takes me roughly 2 to 3 days of working. So maybe 8 to 12 hours, including everything. That's between other tasks that I have to do for my job, but I think that usually is about where it ends up. There is a lot of little things that add up for me. Things like doing a lot of color comps, taking the right reference, trying to find the right reference, working through sketches, where at least half of it is spent before I ever even get to the final paint. And I do have this original painting available at my shop. There's a link down in the description that'll take you over there if you want to check that out. And like I mentioned, this is going to be the exclusive postcard for the month of April over on Patreon. So if you want to get a print of this, and make sure to go sign up before the end of April. That's 2020, in case you're watching this in the future. But yeah, that's about it. Of course, I want to give a massive thank you to all of my patrons over on Patreon. You guys are absolutely incredible. The support that you give me helps me to be able to continue making these videos, so thank you for that. But yeah, that is about it for today. So I'll be back next week with another art video. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you then.